Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Boruto anime review. This one's going to be for episode 205, which is called Proof. So this episode pretty accurately adapts Boruto chapter 39, which is also called Proof, as you can see there. So there's a few changes here in terms of we get the introduction of a Boro and Kashin Koji scene, which more or less replaces, or I guess is meant to be a scene to eventually build up to, the Kashin Koji scene that is in this chapter that they don't show. Just for the sake of spoilers, I suppose I won't talk about that scene just in case. Because it feels like that scene actually has sort of plot relevance that anime viewers might not be aware of just yet. But I will talk about the Boro Kashin Koji scene for sure. There's a few other changes, like in the anime episode they say Jigen is going to take 10 days to get back to full chakra reserves. In the manga it only is 2 days. So my interpretation of that is that this is the anime setting up for breaking away a little bit for a while from the manga, because they're going to have to do some anime originals, because we've been on an incredible run for the most part of anime or of manga adaptation or anime original manga adaptation setup arcs, and we really haven't had any sort of quote unquote filler episodes in quite a while. So they're either, I think, going to do more of a setup arc, develop more of the characters, or we're maybe going to get our first sort of fillery type episodes in a while. I think they're building up to that after the big Boro fight that we have coming up now. Otherwise, I don't see any reason why you would change the timescale so heavily by 8 extra days onto it, because obviously in the manga 2 days makes it really clear. What do you think happens immediately after the Boro fight? He basically says in this episode what he's going to do when he is recovered. He's going to come back to the village, and get the vessel, of course. So adding in so many extra days allows them to do, I suppose, a little bit of an aftermath to this big fight coming up, and so on. We'll get into some of the other stuff. There's other kind of minor changes, in terms of this little bit of dialogue was left out. They added in this little bit of dialogue, but in terms of fundamental changes, that was kind of most of what it is. The other thing that's kind of interesting is just that the Boruto anime is very quickly catching up with the English release of the manga, in that as of this episode we finish volume 10 of the manga, and the only other manga volume that's out is volume 11. Volume 12 I think is out next month in English, so it's just interesting that we're up to what, volume 15-ish I think in Japan, or at least that's what the run of chapters that we have so far released goes up to. But they're really quickly, basically once they finish the Boro fight, they're more or less going to be through nearly all the English released stuff. But I suppose volume 12 will be out by the time the fight finishes. But anyway, let's get into this chapter. So the core of this episode, in terms of our main cast, is on this very long scene that they cut back to multiple times, which is Shikamaru arriving at Naruto's house and kind of interrogating everyone on what happened, more on his continued suspicion of Kawaki, but he makes an effort to try and treat Kawaki roughly how Naruto does, while still acknowledging that he doesn't particularly trust Kawaki. So I like that they managed to find a nice kind of blend with Shikamaru, of him not being exactly like Naruto, but him still being somewhat influenced and inspired by Naruto. But he still is the more realist character, in that a lot of the other leaders you assume would be much more heavy-handed with Kawaki, and Shikamaru I think finds a nice blend between being strict because something crazy has happened, and also being aware of Naruto's orders and in terms of the way to treat Kawaki, and so on. So there's that. It's kind of hard to really kind of discuss what is super important here, because the chapter's called Proof, the episode's called Proof, and it's a lot of just, back and forth of like, here's why I don't trust you. The other characters being like, here's why you should trust him. And it's a nice conversation. It makes a lot of sense. Kawaki is cooperating. He tells them about Jigen and so on. That space-time ninjutsu was used. We bring up the idea of like, oh, what about Sasuke? And this is one of the slight alterations from the manga as well. Is that in the manga, when Boruto brings up, oh, let's contact Sasuke, Shikamaru just says, that's our only hope. It's just that we haven't heard from him since he left on his most recent mission. So we can only pray he's okay and wait for him to return. So in the manga, they established that even though at this stage Sasuke is back in the village, because we saw him kind of come out of the portal after leaving the fight in front of Sakura last time, in the last episode, they established that they haven't found them yet, that Shikamaru is not aware of that information. Whereas here in the anime, they changed this piece of dialogue here to be him saying that, oh, Sasuke returned from his mission that he was on, injured. So they got this right, like in terms of the technicalities. Sasuke's unconscious, so he would not have been able to inform anyone that he was involved with Naruto's fight with Jigen. They still believe he got injured investigating the Otsutsuki kind of thing he was investigating a bunch of episodes ago, the wall with the markings. So they got the continuity right there, which I really, really appreciate, that they did that. So that was actually a really good change in that actually flows much better with what's actually happening. That with Naruto out of the way, Shikamaru is basically the head of the village, so of course he'd be alerted to the fact that Sasuke's returned badly injured, and he's able to relay that to everyone. So, Sarada now kind of has this thing of like, oh, something's happened to her dad, and so on. So that's pretty good. And this is where, like, I'll quickly talk about the Boro scene here, I suppose. He has one of his followers, I suppose, go into the village or whatever to find Kashin Koji. Koji then, I suppose, comes into range where he can actually talk to Boro without the village being alerted that Boro's there. And what we get here is a kind of rather interesting scene. I go back and forth on if I think this is a well-written scene or if I think it's a little bit weirdly written. Part of the issue I kind of have with this is that I think it's a bit of a weird dynamic to have Boro constantly be like, I'm suspicious of you because of this, and Kashin Koji is written to just kind of manipulate words and situations to just be like, oh, but Jigen told me to do this thing that you're suspicious of, and he just uses that same excuse like once or twice, and eventually I think the scene gets a little bit better once they introduce the idea of, oh, like, you've just appeared before me, so you likely don't know that Jigen actually showed up here at the village. You don't know that, right? Yeah. Well, if he showed up and I was truly in suspicion by him, why am I still here? Nothing happened. Why am I allowed to just continue my mission? And Boro has no answer to that. So they saved the scene right at the end, but before that I was just like, I don't think this is exactly the way you want to characterize Kashin Koji, of just like coming up with these kind of like rather like technically correct but kind of like silly sounding excuses. I'd rather he just sort of stay relatively silent and just bring up the Jigen was here point of like, oh, you think you have all the information? You don't even know that Jigen was here and took Naruto away. So just that would have been the better way to do it. And then obviously they skip over this Kashin Koji scene here. I won't go into it too much, because I think they're eventually going to build up to it. It's part of the reason I think they've done the 2 days to 10 days switch. But the other thing here is across these two scenes, we get the further mentioning of like sort of what it is to have a karma mark, and the idea of Jigen is very happy with the progress of Kawaki's karma, and he says he shall awaken as a perfect Otsutsuki. Boruto's must be developing quite well. Also, they'll likely become powerful Otsutsuki. And the divine tree is brought up here. huge enough to devour all life on this planet. And he then mentions, and this is a plot point that I think a lot of people have maybe forgotten about. It's not really come up what the full situation is here, but don't worry, everyone's wishes will be granted. And then there's a scene that they leave out here, and I will bring this up because it's clear that there's still something related to this, but that they might have switched the direction of where this plot is actually going. So when he says everyone's wishes will be granted, he's like, including yours, of course, Amado. And then we get the scene of Amado, who, it's this page here. He looks over to Delta, and she's like, what are you staring at, geezer? You're creeping me out. And he says, I'm counting on it, Jigen. As if his wish relates in some way to Delta, and like what the wish is. I'm guessing it's some sort of using the power of the divine tree, he can make anything possible, or something like that. And Amado's wish relates to Delta in some way. And this is where we get into the idea that, like, all the members of Kara are these people who Amado has like augmented in some way. So, what's the deal here? What's the connection here? But it's interesting, like, that scene wasn't in this episode. They skipped over this, and I'm pretty sure there was a line of dialogue from a previous episode as well, where they had Delta and Amado, where again it was another hinting at some sort of connection between these two that they also didn't include in the anime. So I'm wondering what they're doing here in terms of, like, obviously the theory that everyone has is Delta, or like who Delta was before she was augmented, was Delta Amado's daughter, and his wish, if he gets one, would be to restore her to the way she once was because of something that happened. It feels like that's now a plot point that has now been sort of dropped, but this doesn't spoil too much. In much more recent manga chapters, they have acknowledged, Amado has said once again, I had a daughter. So, it's still a plot point, but it just seems like they don't want you to go down that road, or they want to keep it a secret. I'm not really sure about why they changed that up all that much. So that's fine. Very interesting scene here of, like, just Kawaki kind of being like, why has Naruto been so kind to me? Like, he's so unused to this. Now that Naruto's gone, he's like, why was he like this to me? And Sarada's the one to say, to everyone, not to Lord Seventh, everyone in the family, in the village, is his family. Why did I have such a problem saying that? And she also notes that, she at times has thought about if things would be better if Naruto was her father, and so on. So it's just a nice thing showing, like, her, she's had issues with her father only relatively recently in the story, properly, like, getting to know him, I suppose, and this is just her reflection on the past, and things are better now. It's at this point the vase comes into play. One of the other shinobi brings it down. Is like, is this suspicious? Like, because a broken vase is, like, suspicious, I guess. But interestingly, Boruto is just like, wow, Kawaki, you actually went through with it. He's been basically telling Kawaki to do this the whole time, but is now super excited that Kawaki actually did it. And then even Shikamaru is just like, oh, that's the vase that I've heard so much about. So it's just like, okay, fun use of the vase here as another sense of, like, is this not proof that, like, he's, on our side, that he did this when he didn't have to, and, like, the context behind this, and the way he has a missing arm, it's because he saved Naruto and Himawari, but Shikamaru is just like, no, this isn't good enough. The next, I suppose, major plot point is the arm, the prosthesis arm that's Naruto's, reactivates, establishing that Naruto is alive, that he was basically just temporarily knocked out. That's why the arm fell off and was depowered. So that's what they sort of figure out here. Naruto is still alive. They who haven't seen what's happened to him in the other dimension are now, like, they have hope once again. And immediately Kawaki bursts into action. He has hope. He's just talked about, how much Naruto means to him. And he's just like, Boruto, work with me. And they both use their karma marks together to make a space-time ninjutsu portal. So yeah, we get some cool stuff here, like, the basically the horn symbols on their hands are different, but they work together to make this space-time ninjutsu portal. And basically they, there were others walk through, Shikamaru is about to, he uses his, shadow possession on them, but Kawaki just absorbs it. And very interesting, very cool scene here. Kawaki is the last one to walk through and is just like, you just need proof, right? Fine, I'll get it for you. So I don't have too much of a problem with Shikamaru basically being sort of like beaten by the kids, just because his style of jutsu is going to be very easy to absorb. And while he is super, super skilled, that absorption ability is not something he can particularly like counter necessarily. So the kids have walked through a portal, and for the preview, we know they meet Boro. So Boro makes pretty quick work of just like, he has the scene with Kashin Koji, and then immediately is off to have a confrontation with all the kids here to defend the kind of coffin ceiling jar that Naruto is in. So yeah, big fight here, and this time out, it's a big fight where, power level stuff isn't going to be as much of an issue. Like, they're not going to have to depower the 4 characters here to fight Boro, because they're going to have to be at their absolute best to take out someone like Boro. This is not going to be a case of like with Naruto and Sasuke, where there's always a sense of like, no. Why are you writing Naruto and Sasuke that way? Use their powers in this way. They can do this. And it seems like they always have a bit of a struggle with that. This is very different. This is going to be a big proof of how strong they all are. So Boruto and his karma mark, how's that going to come into play? Kawaki, in a way, is, I suppose, kind of the powerhouse of the group going in here overall, just with the level of skill he seems to have using the karma mark. And then those Boruto and Kawaki together seem to be able to do even more together. Mitsuki is obviously there and is capable of doing some pretty big stuff. We know what his big finisher move is. And then, of course, the setup that they haven't come back to in a while, Sarada has been training to perfect the Chidori. Now, as far as we're aware, she has not perfected it. So that is a very interesting plot point that I think, without spoiling anything, I think I can sort of see the slight anime change that they're going to do compared to the manga in this fight. And it could be really cool. Like, Sarada is already going to be quite important in this fight. She gets to be a little bit of a spotlight throughout this fight. And I think they're just going to enhance that all the more with what I suspect they are going to do. So, yeah, some fight episodes coming up once again, which again, I think helps to explain the why they didn't go super all out on the previous big fight, because this one is almost like just as big. And this one's kind of like longer because it's the kids going to have to sort of figure out how to take down a super powerful opponent. And now it's 4-on-1, but we obviously don't know the full scope of Boro's powers, just that he is very, very powerful. Now, I expected there to be more with Boro prior to the fight beginning. Like, I am a little shocked that all we really had was like 2-3 scenes establishing that he has a cult, and a few times of him mentioning the Infinite Tsukiyomi, which he didn't mention at all in the manga. Now, the scene in this episode with Kashin Koji, he did seem to clarify the whole Infinite Tsukiyomi thing, which is more of that, I guess, as part of the plan, Infinite Tsukiyomi is going to just be part of the Divine Tree stuff that happens. So he's excited for that and his cult and how that's all going to work. I'm guessing we'll get more clarification on exactly what the situation is throughout this fight. But yeah, I haven't been like super impressed with just the extra Boro scenes that we've had. And that it's like, okay, here's a little bit of this background stuff of like what he does on his own. But I'm still not entirely clear on like, okay, like what does this really add that, what they're about to do, this really affects or changes anything? I'm not entirely sure. So, yeah, that's pretty much been my thoughts on the episode. It's a really strong setup episode. Is the scene with Shikamaru overall a little bit too long? Perhaps, and I think I had the same issues about this chapter when I reviewed it as a manga chapter. But a lot of the other scenes I think backed it up really well. Getting to see Kashin Koji again, more Boro setup, the whole Jigen scene again, especially some of the changes that they made compared to the manga, are actually quite interesting, even though it seems like rather subtle on the outside. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on this episode of the Boruto anime, as well as what I had to say about it. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.